Margin accounts. Now, questions on the exam regarding margin accounts are absolutely nothing to be intimidated by. Questions on the exam regarding margin accounts pertain mostly to simple definitions and a few calculations, and they do not come up often, but you've got to know them. Now, the main concepts to understand for this section are that you have long margin accounts and you have short margin accounts. They both have an initial margin and they both have a maintenance requirement. We'll go over the long margin first. Now, in a margin account, the investor borrows a portion of the purchase price from his or her brokerage firm to employ leverage, and the initial amount that can be borrowed is equal to 50%. This is for both long margin and short margin accounts. And the customer can meet the initial requirement by depositing cash or securities with a market value of 2 times the requirement. The maintenance requirement, meaning how much equity you must maintain in the account, the maintenance requirement is 25% for long positions and 30% for short positions. Now, even before we get into the calculations, I just want to go over the paperwork. When a margin account is established, the customer has to sign a margin agreement which contains 3 parts. The first part is the credit agreement, and this is exactly what it sounds like. A credit agreement spells out the terms of the loan that the investor is taking from the brokerage firm regarding repayment of the loan as well as interest charged. The hypothecation agreement. Now, this is the collateral agreement, and by signing the hypothecation agreement, the customer is agreeing to use the securities as collateral for their loan. Now, the customer also agrees to the fact that they are allowing the firm to rehypothecate or recollateralize 140% of their debit balance to the bank to secure their loan. Remember that figure, it's 140% rehypothecation. The loan consent agreement. Now, this form allows the brokerage firm to loan the customer's margin securities to short sellers who are looking to borrow the stock from the brokerage to do their short selling. Okay, let's go over some long position calculations. Now, the equation for the initial margin purchases regarding long positions is long market value minus debit equals equity. I'm going to give you an example here, and we're going to stick with this example for a while. An investor purchases 1,000 shares of a stock trading at $30 a share. Now, if you set this up as long market value minus debit equals equity, your long market value is going to equal $30,000 minus $15,000 that you can borrow from the brokerage firm means that you would have to come in with $15,000, either cash or 2 times the marginable security amount. So in this example, the investor purchased $30,000 stock. He borrowed $15,000 from the brokerage firm, which is his debit amount, and this results in an equity amount of $15,000. Now, only 2 situations can occur here. Either the market value is going to go down or the market value is going to go up. We're going to take a look at both situations, and we're going to start with a market value decrease. Now, when purchasing securities on margin, a minimum amount of equity must be maintained or the customer will receive a maintenance call to bring the account equity back up to the minimum required. Now, as mentioned earlier, on long positions, the initial margin amount is 50%. The maintenance amount is 25% of market value. So again, let's stick with our example. A customer buys $30,000 long market value. He's got a debit of $15,000 and he has equity of $15,000. Now, a question that you may encounter asks, to what market value could the investor's position decline and still remain at the minimum maintenance required for that position. Now this calculation is very, very straightforward. You simply want to take the debit balance and multiply by 4/3. Now for example, assume our investor, he's got a $30,000 long market value, he's got a debit of $15,000, and he's got equity of $15,000. Using the formula, you're just simply going to take that debit value of $15,000 times 4, divide by 3, and it's going to give you a market value of $20,000. Now if we use the equation for the long margin purchase, we can see that the equity is going to be a long market value of $20,000 minus the debit of $15,000 for a $5,000 equity. Now this $5,000 equity divided by the long market value of $20,000 is exactly 25%. That is your minimum maintenance requirement. Now if the market value were to drop below that, let's say it went down to $18,000, the investor would receive a maintenance call to bring his equity back up to the 25% that's required. So in this situation, let's say our long market value dropped down to $18,000 and we have a $15,000 debit, it's going to give us equity of $3,000. Now $18,000 times the maintenance requirement of 25% is $4,500. If we're at $3,000, we're going to have to bring in $1,500. We'll receive a $1,500 maintenance call, and we'll be bringing our equity back up to the 25% that's required. Restricted accounts. Now when the market value of an account falls, causing the equity in the account to be below the initial requirement of 50%, but above the maintenance requirement of 25%, the account is known as restricted. Now, customers can continue to make purchases in a restricted margin account. They simply have to continue to meet the initial requirement on all new purchases. Now, when selling in a restricted account, any sales proceeds will reduce the debit value. Sales proceeds can be withdrawn from the account up to 50%. However, any withdrawn amount will increase the customer's debit value. Market value increase. Now, as I said below, only two situations can occur. Either the market value can decrease or the market value can increase. Now, as the market value of the account increases, the equity in the account will also increase. The extent to which the equity is increased over the initial requirement is known as excess equity. Now, to find the excess equity of an account, you simply want to subtract 50% of the market value from the equity in the account. So basically, you take your equity and you subtract out 50% of the long market value, and it's going to show you your excess equity. Now, the amount of cash that can be withdrawn from an account is known as Special Memorandum Account, SMA. And it's important to note that this is a line of credit to the investor from the firm. The SMA of an account will increase with the investor depositing funds, or the account receiving dividends or interest, as well as the proceeds of security sales within the account. Now, these occurrences will pay down the debit value of the account, resulting in excess equity. And cash withdrawn from an account will increase the debit amount and decrease the equity of the account. I'm going to go through several examples. Let's go back to our original example. We have a $30,000 long market value. We have a debit value of $15,000, and we have equity of $15,000. Now the market value, let's assume it goes from $30,000 up to $34,000. Now this would result in $2,000 of excess equity. You simply want to take your new long market value of $34,000 minus your debit of $15,000, and it's going to give you equity of $19,000. Now, let's assume $2,000 is withdrawn. We had equity of $19,000, and it's going to result in our debit value increasing and the equity decreasing. So the long market value is going to remain at $34,000. Our debit is going to increase to $17,000, and the equity in the account is going to fall to $17,000 as well. Now at this point, SMA may be withdrawn, or it can be used to purchase securities. Now, as the initial requirement is 50%, the account's buying power is equal to 2 times the SMA. Buying power equals 2 times SMA. So using the same example, this time instead of withdrawing the SMA, let's assume the investor uses it to purchase additional securities. Going back to the original example, we have a $30,000 market value, we've got a $15,000 debit, and we have equity of $15,000 in the account. The market value increases to $34,000. Now this results in $2,000 excess equity. $34,000 minus the same $15,000 debit, our equity is now at $19,000. Now we know that buying power is 2 times the SMA of $2,000. So if the investor purchases an additional $4,000 of securities, the market value is going to increase and the debit value will increase. So now we've got a long market value of $38,000. That was $34,000 market value. We added another 4 to it. So we have a $38,000 long market value. We've got a $19,000 debit amount now, and our equity is $19,000. Note that the customer's equity remains the same. What would happen if the investor wanted to purchase an amount greater than his SMA will allow? He simply needs to deposit 50% of the difference. Now, for example, if the investor had $2,000 SMA, allowing him to purchase $4,000 worth of stock, but he decided to purchase $6,000, we're simply going to take the $6,000 minus out the buying power of $4,000, leaves us a $2,000 difference. Half of that $2,000 difference, 50%, means that there would be a $1,000 deposit required.